ready for part two. Definitely excited about this. There was like I think I mentioned it on the previous one. Really, probably only got to maybe half of what I wanted to cover. So we'll kind of jump right into it. Really picking up as I was telling you off air. Where I'm in the process. I should by the middle of July have two force plates coming to Fairmont. Again, I have enough experience to at least get us started. What I'm worried about is again, basically just having an expensive scale, right? That doesn't really
Mhm.
help us. You know, I still want to be performance driven, but I also want to be able to almost back up what we're doing with sports science, with analytical, like with actual objective data. And I think also another thing that I'm interested in, and I think our athletic training staff is just return to play situations for kids, right? Are we getting a kid back to whatever their jump height, their power output was prior to injury? Are we able to somehow eventually predict maybe some of these injuries, or at least go back and look at maybe some trends retrospectively? So to kind of start off with that, what big picture, and then we'll kind of work our way down. When you think of sports science, especially in the role of like Division II collegiate athletics, just collegiate athletics in general, how do you define it, and how do you, feel like it's best suited to serve the purpose of it? It's not just like I said, you're gathering data on a force plate, and then nobody ever actually looks at that data. What is that definition of it, and then what is that best practice to make sure that it's actually benefiting the coaches and then therefore the athletes?
So, I mean, I think just very generally, sports science is a scientific approach to the training process with the goal of performance enhancement and better caring for the athlete. And so, how that gets delivered depends on the situation, the context. Um, we often talk about how, there's thanks to commercially available devices, thanks to things that have taken off in various places, primarily collegiate sport and professional sport, but then even military and even at this point high school and elsewhere, private sector, right? There's commonly used tools, and those tools can be very, very helpful, but as much as I've relied on force plates as a coach, as a sports scientist, it is a tool for sports science, just like GPS or heart rate or whatever, you name the wearable, um, you name the various instruments that you can do performance testing, monitoring with. So, you know, you start with what questions do we have? What problems might we want to solve? And so much of it is scalable. As far as you said, let's start bigger picture, right? And that certainly makes sense. But so with the people, with the context of the situation, the sport, and all that, then you can kind of create this structure in this system to where it's a very purposefully guided process. Certainly, there can be things, especially when you get more in the way of monitoring, that can be somewhat exploratory, and certainly there can be a surveillance like aspect to athlete monitoring where a lot of it, I shouldn't say a lot of it, but some of it can be, we don't want to be surprised, or we don't want to find out something's gone wrong when it's too late. um, but I think it's really important that things in the way of training prescription and things that are part of coaching, those things are very much sports science as well. It's not just making measurements. Certainly, measurement is part of it, but um, you know, how much thought, and is it principles based and science based? And you can get into, on the coaching side, right? There's the soft sciences, psychology, sociology, like it's all just trying to do a really good job with the athletes you're working with, and like in the strength and conditioning role, the coaches and sport medicine and all that stuff that goes into it. So I think that there's this past decade has been super, super exciting. But I think, like a lot of things, when stuff happens so quickly, it's if I was if you're an undergraduate student, right, we're well past that. I think it'd be easy and understandable to immediately think that sports science is using this tool, that tool, and this tool, and even to the point of with mentioned Division II. While yes, things have kind of trickled down and things have become more affordable and more popular, you know, to say I'm at Division II or Division III or NAIA, so I can't do sports science. You might not be able to afford certain things. You might not be able to have uh, the amount of help, and might be limited in various ways. But I would like to think we do sports science at the high school level. Does that look different in many ways than Division II collegiate, Division I collegiate? Certainly, but it's just it's a process.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree, and I think that's kind of what concerns me is like I know it's just a tool, and at the end of the day, like we've had good results at Fairmont. Our athletes have done a great job. We've had a lot of success, and we still had some like small sports. I mean, again, that's something as simple as a just jump mat, and monitoring vertical jump height throughout an athlete's playing season, off season, career, and seeing those trends upward. And obviously, even just something as simple as like, I mean, we use train aerobics, so just being able to monitor an
Mhm.
athlete's max, like working max throughout their career, like that is still, but that's still sports science. Like it doesn't have to be a $4,000 force plate. But I think being able to like start to dig a little bit deeper, and I'll kind of start with force plates here. And the original kind of question I had is like building like this perfect like athlete monitoring system. But before I kind of maybe get into that, if I end up even coming back and asking it that same way, from a force plate standpoint, my main thing right now is, there's almost an unlimited amount of metrics to an extent that you can look
Mhm.
at. What currently does like the research say? What does your kind of personal experience and evidence say? And then what do you just personally feel like you would like recommend to somebody in our situation that's just starting out with using force plates? Like, what are those kind of like big rock metrics? And later in the interview, I may come back and circle back on a question or two about this. But like, what are those big rocks? Again, obviously, jump height is the first thing that everybody looks at, which makes sense because that is the outcome. That's what you're changing to an extent. Rate of force development is one of those things. But how important do you feel like the eccentric side versus the concentric or the propulsive side? How much of it is impulse a factor? Time to take off, time to peak velocity, like all of those things. What and I guess we'll start with maybe just CMJ metrics because obviously isometric pools are going to have maybe a little bit different value in terms of some of their metrics. But just starting with CMJ metrics, testing metrics, what do you feel like is the biggest bang for their buck, research wise and just anecdotal evidence wise?
So I think the most helpful thing to do is to get two buckets.
Okay.
One is, call it athlete assessment or athlete profiling, and then the
Yep.
other one would be athlete monitoring.
Okay.
And so if you're, literally test session one with various teams, all you can do is profile, right? And so I would say before even getting into specific metrics, I think starting with the questions of, I want to get a picture of our team. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Well, it can be a number of things. It can be, uh, do we think, like from a neuromuscular standpoint, they're anywhere near where we think they should be, would expect them to be? What, you know, having some kind of expectation goal, as far as ability, and that can be contextualized as far as like, look, going into the research and looking at level and sport and all that type of thing. Um, and then uh, something else I'd go to would be, are our uh, if we compare like our freshmen, haven't been in the program very long, to our returners, and particularly to like our juniors and seniors, people that have been in the program for a while. And, so ideally you would like to find that generally our seniors, if they've been with us for 4 years, that they're better developed and have some better physical ability. And so I guess a couple of things to that. One is, you collect one team one time. You might learn some things in that area I just spoke to. But the idea of getting an understanding of, for example, this is kind of what our typical like freshman that shows up, their abilities are. And I'm not saying it always shakes out this way, but for example, when I was a strength coach for East Tennessee State baseball over 5 years, there's the incoming freshmen, not the transfers, which back then it was just some JUCO guys, really consistent as far as mean, and even the standard deviations were pretty close when it came to, it was specifically iso pull, but the jumps also, they would pull around 3,000-ish newtons, and they would jump around 30 some centimeters for a no arm swing counter movement. And so, you start to get an idea of, okay, this is what they come in like. You can do some goal setting, which is very strength coach lens, right? And development lens of like, this is where I would like their power output to get to. You can, specific metrics, you can start thinking about, okay, is this sport a sport where they have to overcome their body mass a ton, to where, like volleyball might be a good example of, uh, you know, here's, they're producing, I don't know, 4 to 5,000 watts of power. And then you can associate that pretty well with jump height based on body mass. And so you can start to kind of, it's like basic profiling stuff. I wouldn't get into the things that really would be the way of more of the monitoring side. And so to continue on with the profiling real quick, you know, what you might find, and we've actually saw this with WVU data for a wide number of Olympic sports, so many sports have very similar like jump profiles. I want to say of like the 9 teams we assessed, I think it was just swimming that was a little different. And so, that can be helpful in some ways, maybe of look, this is a power-based sport, male or female. And based on that, especially early on, let's think about how we might come to some goals that, we talked last week, like, should we do more strength development and more, and they're in the preparatory period, more general versus specific, those types of things. And, different sport situations with the coaches might come to, like I just gave a bit of a volleyball example, but you can kind of feeling like this is connected to the sport. So like baseball, for example, pitchers, how, relative to body mass might not matter as much compared to everybody else, right? Where, when they're actually hitting might not matter all that much, but then they have to run after they hit the ball, and they have to play defense. And so I think that's where you can start to make some goals that are, early on, just very basic, maybe again, male, female power based, or endurance based, which might look different. And then over time, so, when it comes to assessment, as it typically goes, test 2, test 3, 1, be careful with making too many, maybe they're getting some familiarization, and there's a bit of effect that you get from that. And so you can start to see how they respond to training, and you can get some, from the profiling standpoint, if you measure somebody and they're unbelievably impressive as far as strength power characteristics. There's a good chance that they've done some strength training and maybe are more trained. Some people are blessed and might be pretty impressive and not have trained all that much. And you can kind of picture right then the value of we do multiple measurements and we get to see how much they change. Okay. And Andrew Lane and I, back in the ETSU days, early, the first couple years of the monitoring program, so many teams, every single team hit statistical significance in basically everything from iso pull within less than a year. Most of them was like 6 months, except the throwers that had strength training background. And even, when they showed up, they were much stronger as a group. I think the mean pull was like 5,000+ for the males. And so I think that you kind of have those more crude metrics that are very performance driven as far as, and again, I think some of it would go the way of like, to what degree do they have to overcome their body mass and how? So, it might be more power output versus relative power if we're talking about a thrower versus a soccer player. Generally just get that goal setting there, and sometimes jump height, I know people sometimes jump height can be a nice way to communicate with coaches and athletes and using the other metrics to connect them. This is why these things happen. So for example, and this was almost a decade ago now with volleyball here, there was one girl that stood out big time. In fact, I think she still would be the highest jumper I've seen over the years here. It was a great way of, look, her power output is the same as all these others that are at the top 5-ish, 6-ish. But she's a defensive specialist, and that's why she's about 10 centimeters higher than everybody else. She's like 30 to 40 pounds lighter. Okay. And so you start to kind of tell that story. And I think it's very important as best you can connect those things to the sport, to the coach. And, you might do some things a little bit differently at times, like actually sticking with that volleyball situation, I would have done in our battery of jump tests. So static, counter movement, unloaded and loaded with just the barbell, which we can talk about that. I also would have done counter movement jump with arm swing. That, as far as a monitoring tool, really is not a good idea. It just provides more noise. But the coach, and there's reason that they would be interested in how well do these athletes use their arm swing. And, not surprisingly, like outside hitters got so much more out of their arm swing, right? It's sport specificity, years and years, and they're really good at timing it and getting like more into the 30% contribution to their height. And so then with monitoring, where some of it would depend on what is the frequency at which you're testing. So if it's just a couple times a year, it really probably is almost like an in-between profile and monitoring. It's not fatigue monitoring so much as just program efficacy.
Yeah. So let me ask, because that part of my plan is, so I'll just give you, here's tentatively the plan for like a sport like football or basketball, right? Obviously week of fall camp, our football guys, they're already going to come in and start getting a little bit beat up. So we're going to try to get it done early in the week. That'll be kind of like our baseline testing. Mainly just CMJ data. Right now I'm not going to do isometric thigh pulls, even though I eventually would like to. But mainly just CMJ data. And then the plan would be, as we go through the season, right, we're getting that at least every week, potentially even they train twice a week, potentially even every training session. Basketball will be the same way. Now, basketball will have a month and a half of actual training. So we'd be able to actually like kind of push them and hopefully go through some sort of overreaching phase and stuff like that before the season starts. And then it would kind of be athlete monitoring, whereas like football and there's fall sports, like they're almost straight into athlete monitoring to an extent. So with the athlete monitoring aspect, how how much time, like at what point can I look at a football player? We're midway through the season and his CMJ jumps metric, whether it's his jump height or
Mhm.
whether it's power output, um, impulse, whatever it is, has started to drop off. Like, it dropped off a week or two in a row, or it's dropped off, 25% from what it was, the average for the first, month and a half of the season. How much data do you need? When should you start to panic? And vice versa, when it starts to go up, if
Mhm.
it's like, oh, this person improved 25%, but did they improve? And I might have a follow up to this too, something that me and Josh were actually talking about this week, just training wise. But how much did they actually improve because they just became more familiar with the test and they were just in a better mood because they went from being a bench guy to now they're a starter and they're just giving us better effort? Like, how do you kind of from a monitoring standpoint, how much data do you need? Um, Obviously, I know the more you have, the better, but how much, like at a minimum, do we need? At what point can I feel confident going to the coach and be like, hey, coach, we've been testing your guys twice a week now all season, or week 6 of the season. This guy might need like a really light practice today, or whatever it is. Like, is there a way for me to confidently be able to go and say that with only, 6 to 8 weeks of monitoring data? Does that make sense? So, like, how does the athlete monitoring side of it, how do you kind of initiate that from the number of trials that you have, the kind of like the number of the level of standard deviations one way or the other before it becomes like an actual, has enough power to it to stand as like an actual, change, like a physiological change, good or bad.
Yeah, there's a lot there. So, I would say one thing I would recommend is if you're going to be jumping that frequently, if you can, even 2 times in the semester, 3 times in the semester, before at the beginning of camp, mid-season, at the end of the season, if you can do some type of jump battery, I think that can be very, very helpful. So for example, doing a couple different loaded conditions, or even just two, a counter movement without the bar and a counter movement with the bar. And depending on how strong they are, I mean, for football players, you could get actually, if you wanted to, you could get pretty heavy for certain positions.
How do
Um,
you sorry, how do you feel about like when I was down at P3, they did like CMJs, they did drop jumps, they did squat jumps, and then
mhm.
they did their loaded jumps with like a trap bar. How do you feel like that? Just in terms of especially the way that we're gonna have our jump mat set or our plate set up, we're gonna be a little bit of a condensed spot in the weight room. So I don't know if I can have two people holding barbells, but I could probably have two people holding trap bars or even like dumbbells. And to me, that's a very similar position as like hands on the hips
I was so
positions.
that's exactly what I was going to say. I've always done it on a bar like squat position, but yeah, I would just not have them hold a PVC. I'd have them do a Kimbo hands on hips
Yep,
if you're going to
yep, yep.
do it, if you're going to do it
That's the
that way.
plan. Yeah, that's the plan.
And so a couple things to that. One is, and this is there's a profiling aspect as well as a monitoring aspect. One is from the profiling standpoint, some general ideas of if you see big drop offs um, when athletes get loaded with just a little bit of weight, that can tell you a lot. It can tell you that they have some strength issues, and particularly if they're relatively new to the weight room. We see this all the time at the high schools. In fact, it's our go-to is with as many teams as possible is counter movement unloaded and counter movement with the bar. And we even do that with like cross country teams. In that, okay, they start training, they get stronger, and we see that the metrics that we're interested in improve. But probably for a lot of those sports, especially the really, really developmental athletes, it's not just improve those, it's massively reduce the drop off that occurs that can be 30, 40, even more percent for jump height and some other, power and that type of stuff. And so, think about what that means as far as just robustness and being able to hold, positions and not being so overcome by something that really is not all that heavy. You think about sports where you have to so many of the sports you work with, right, are essentially acceleration, deceleration. You put your foot in the ground, you have to handle more force than your body mass, and So I think that there's some big value there. And you could potentially flag, some that, I don't know how much what that would look like football specifically, but
Yeah.
some you might think, okay, we really need to be mindful of this, and maybe developmental program, that type of thing. And then for static jumps, the idea that we get some information related to how well an athlete utilizes their stretch shortening cycle. So we're removing that with the static jump, or sometimes called squat jump. And so I think that there's some nice value to that of, okay, they're pretty good jumping with the counter movement condition, and then they really fall off with the static. And so I know we're probably going to talk about some weightlifting things, but how do we train and develop stretch shortening cycle? Weightlifting isn't the only way to do that. There's others as well that work. And having said all that, I think we should never get too far away from some type of assessment of just generally how good is it or isn't it. Like, we get lost in ratios, and I think that happens a lot now with things that are going on in sports science commercial available land. And well, this ratio is beautiful, it's perfect, but the performance actually isn't very good. Versus, oh, they had a big, they counter movement 65 centimeters, and their static jump was only 48. It's a bad ratio. Well, both jumps are actually really good. Just one's really better than the other. And there might be something to, some training we can glean from that profile, but I'd take the better performers. Um, from from the monitoring standpoint, your question about, like, how do you know when to intervene? That is probably at the heart of athlete monitoring, as much as anything or more. And depending on the lens, right? Like, if you're a running coach and you're working with a runner and you're kind of in control of everything, and myself as a weightlifting coach, it's that situation, right? As the strength coach, to where it's like you said, I don't control practice as the strength coach. How do I inform a coach I might be concerned? Um, and so, I think a lot of that gets into some of the helpful training theory things to start of, do we think this athlete is simply overreached and we don't want them to be overreached? Or is it we actually think there's a massive problem? And so I would have done a Zoom a couple of weeks ago with one of my former GAs who's at a Division I school now, an ACC school. And one of the things we actually talked about is, there's a difference between this suggests that their performance is going to be bad at the competition, versus there might be some things here that are concerning from a fatigue management standpoint. And just what I just said, right, is thinking through that often gets into practical logistics of, where are we at in the season, right? Are we 2 weeks in and we think there's they're not going to probably perform worse on Saturday, but they probably shouldn't, like, and the tools that we can use. There's everything from smallest worthwhile change to statistical process control, like where we create boundaries that are individualized, to account for different athletes being different. Versus, if it's going to the last game of the season, well, they might be a little more fatigued than we would like, and but there's nothing coming after this, or we have to win this game to get to the conference championship. And so I think that when if you how you communicate things with the coach, some of it is, what is your system of communication? And so, to give some examples, is it, I am going to spotlight, like a weekly thing? They're going to get something where, depending on you, I always recommend starting out simpler and seeing how that goes. Build comfort level and all of that stuff. And, one coach I could think of that I'd worked with at WVU was much more interested and detailed in this stuff. And so I could go further earlier on. But, if you're essentially never, I'm not using you as the example, just if you're someone that's collecting data and you're never communicating it, it's been 2 months. I think that, like, if you're then going to go to the coach and say, Coach, I'm concerned about so and so, that really seems like a lot to the coach, right? Like, you've never come to me with this. You're telling me I should be concerned. And so, it's if you're doing more frequent drop-ins with it, and different different system situations, but like if you're doing something weekly, or I know some teams, there's both like a dashboard situation, but then also like a 30-minute in-person weekly check-in every Monday or something like that, to where then you can point out a couple, and it could be just, look, I'm not suggesting you do anything. It's up to you. I'm giving you some information, right? And uh, part of that process, I think it's very helpful if early on the education aspect is, you're mindful of that, right? Because you're introducing these things to the coach. And so the coach in some ways is learning, this is the purpose of it. This is the terminology. These are the ideas behind it. This is how this stuff works. And so, if I just a thought that popped in my mind of when we did like Dari motion capture when I with R&I at WVU. I saw the first time I saw like the printed out thing where it's got the athlete there in anatomical position, and it'd be like a big red dot on the knee. And I remember saying, this isn't all of those like automated things have certain, that doesn't mean you should just do it that way. But I was like, we send this to the track coach. Track coach is going to be concerned. They're not even going to know what to be concerned about, but red dot on the knee will scare him. And so,
Yeah, for sure.
putting thought into how you're going to provide that information. And I think that, a big thing that's talked about in athlete monitoring is it's not just one thing. It's a constellation of things. So I think one of the biggest places to start is, and it's depending on the sport, some are easier than others. What's the work done in the weight room? What's the work done on the field? And I don't say, again, it's not necessarily easy. But if you have things like, okay, all of a sudden we see a change that points to some fatigue. Well, did they do a whole lot more volume? Yes, they did a whole lot more volume. Maybe you could, looking at like by within position group, and then even the whole team, or offense and defense, are they all sort of going the same way, or is it like these one or two stand out? And
Yeah.
so I especially with the weekly jump testing, it's putting all of that picture into it of the context. And it's not as simple as RSI mod fell a little bit, I'm gonna go tell the coach they need to change something. At the same time, if there's, to steal a Bill Sands example, he gives a medical example. It's like if you wake up and you look at your watch and your heart rate overnight was like 4 or 5 beats per minute elevated than normal, right? It was 60 and now it's normally 55. Well, okay, that's something, I guess. But if everything else is fine, and you go through the day and you have a workout and that feels fine and you're sharp mentally, all that, right? Versus I woke up feeling bad and I have a borderline fever and, blood pressure's a little elevated. All of the, okay, now everything's pointing to
Right.
something is going on.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Um, for the loaded jumps, you mentioned like using the 45-pound bar for high school kids. Is that something that should be, obviously you need to standardize it for each team, but is that something that should be relative? Like I think of our football guys doing a 45-pound bar or trap bar or whatever on their back isn't that much different than a CMJ for some of those guys versus like if they were to do 135, that would be somewhere around. Should it be relative to body mass? Should it be relative to kind of just almost an assumed relativity based off their strength levels? Like obviously the football team should be doing that versus like the track and cross country team may need to do an empty barbell. Where would you start with that? Is that something that you definitely have some differences there?
Yeah, for sure. So, my
Male
dissertation,
athletes versus female athletes, even.
my, my dissertation, we did with static jumps only. Uh, 0, 11, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 kilograms. The average female body mass was low. It was like 61. So these girls are squat jumping their body mass.
Hmm.
And they were strong enough to hold those positions just fine, come off the ground just fine. Um, with the PVC, the static jump for a lot of our younger high school athletes is such a challenge that they can't hold a flat force trace to do it.
Right.
Um, I think so. So yes, factoring in how strong they are in that, um, something I really haven't mentioned. I think it's actually one of the nicer ways to, if when you have the time to do it, to look into some things related to fatigue. In that, um, when they get to that weight, and it would depend on their strength levels. The idea that they'll see fall offs, um, where they weren't seeing fall offs previously when they were fresh. And so, you know, I've never seen something where you go, like the football example of you do an unloaded and then you go right to 40 or 50 kilograms. Normally it's they do more tests because they'll still do like the bar and then they load it a little bit more and then they load
Right.
it a little bit more. If you're talking about cross country, it might just be the bar. And so that doesn't take as long. Um, and you can get some nice information with that in that you're getting a uh, load power or load whatever metric you want to look at curve. And to the profiling piece, um, to what you just said, you take untrained people and you have them jump with nothing, and then you put a bar on their back, and you'll see power output, among other things, but specifically power, fall off a good deal, because velocity is dropping off so much. Strong people, power output goes up because it's a higher force because of the external load,
Right.
and
Right.
velocity, either the change is negligible or nothing really. And so, but eventually, right, if you load them, if it gets heavy enough, you'll see power output drop some. And so I wouldn't suggest to do, I mean, you could do like unloaded and then something relatively light weekly, I guess. I would not recommend doing some big full battery. I mean, that's just the amount of time. And also,
Yeah.
very practically, I think one of the challenges with frequent jump testing is just making sure they're always excited and given full effort.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that's definitely, it's something that we've definitely ran into even with doing like the jump mats. I think most of our kids, most of the time take it serious, but there is a mundane aspect of it. And I think a lot of that, and I always not really joke. I mean, it's kind of a joke thing, but it's like, when our football team wins, Monday morning, there's very few people in the training room and Tuesday lift goes really well. if our football team loses, everybody's in the training room on Monday because they're all hurt now all of a sudden, and then Tuesday's lift doesn't go so well. So there's an aspect too of, you know, the mental side of it for sure in terms of this. And again, I think this first year for us, there is definitely going to be some just kind of gathering some baseline data and looking at it. I do want to switch gears over to Olympic lifting for a minute here. So obviously, like you and I have had multiple conversations, and you've seen me present about it, and I think there's a lot of benefit. I think, and I'm just kind of laying some of this out here. I think there's a lot of benefit to be had from maybe not even the full Olympic lifts, but just at least the derivatives. What do you typically like? Kind of your elevator pitch as the pros for. And then I'll have a follow-up in terms of like, what do you usually hear as the arguments against, and how do you start to maybe help people overcome some of those arguments? And I have a couple of those arguments potentially too, if you feel like, if I feel like I need to specifically ask those. But what's your kind of elevator pitch in terms of the benefits? Again, not maybe even doing full snatches, like a hang power snatch, a hang power clean, a power jerk, right? A push jerk. Like, what do you feel like from a sports performance, athletic development standpoint? What is your kind of elevator pitch in terms of here's the benefits of those movements?
So, I mean, very simply, I would say it is a great way to develop strength and power. And there are, aspects that involve stretch shortening cycle that occurred during the transition. I think it's important to remember that it is, especially if we're starting off the floor or around there, that combination aspect of strength and then power, the positions involved, the flat back, knees back, movement pattern and body positions of the lift, the athleticism, the time factor of how far you're displacing the bar in such a minimal amount of time, as well as the just general athleticism and mobility and all of those factors. And I know when we get into these conversations, things get very like, for the sake of the conversation, you start to sort of like tease out this thing or that thing. And so one of the things I always point out, like, yes, weightlifters are some of the most powerful, and for, relative to body mass, most powerful people on the planet. They're also insanely strong, and they also do all sorts of exercises that are not snatch and clean and jerk. There might be what you referred to there, the derivatives, but they also do RDLs or stiff leg deadlifts and back squats.
Accessory.
And all, yeah, exactly.
So, one of the things that, in terms of like the arguments against, obviously the biggest one that people hear is just the ability to have the time to coach it, which I do see that argument. And I think, and again, there are some teams at Fairmount that we have not taught. Most of our teams do some variation of some of those exercises. And I've talked, like, I like doing unilateral, especially like jerks. I love like a good dumbbell jerk. I think it's easier for our kids to learn that and then almost transition into a barbell, especially like for soccer. We're going to have, 10 to 15 new soccer girls on the team this year, 10 new volleyball girls on the team. It's an easier way to start there while they're in season. And the last thing that they want to be learning is the last thing that I want them to be doing in season is being frustrated that they can't figure out how to do this new exercise in the weight room. So I've always kind of started with like a dumbbell unilateral approach, and then we go to more of a bilateral. Hey, we're going to end up doing full snatches, full cleans, full jerks at the end of maybe your freshman year, maybe not your freshman season, but your freshman year. So the time thing I get to an extent, only to an extent. The one thing you mentioned about mobility, though, that is something that I have ran into. Again, that's another reason that I feel like there's a benefit from the unilateral stuff. Like for our baseball guys, we have baseball guys that, they hold their arms over their head, and like this is their mobility limitations. So
that actually, for a baseball player, wouldn't be that bad.
What's that?
I said, for a baseball player, what you just did wouldn't be that bad.
Yeah, exactly. And again, we have football guys that have had multiple AC joint springs, labrum issues. And again, I know that, you're a good enough coach. You're not going to like, try to hammer a round peg into a square hole, or whatever it is, square peg into a round hole. But what do you like in situations like that with mobility limitations, with, injury histories, maybe you get a kid that transfers in from a school that has never done Olympic lifts before and he's in
Mhm.
his graduate year. Like, is there obviously still a contraindication time and place for some of those movement patterns from the Olympic lifts and some of their derivatives? And then how do you kind of work around some of those things? Like, have you had to use
Yeah. So,
modified
I mean,
versions?
for sure. I mean, that's just coaching, right? Like it's a version of you got someone that can't get close to parallel without their heels coming off the ground and their back rounding. And so what do? There's a bunch of different things you can try. Whether it's stuff with dumbbells or have them come to safety pins, like right up until things start to deteriorate too much. And I both from a teaching standpoint as well as a to some degree very coach assessment, you can sequence things in a way that are, one, teaching them things without them realizing that they're being taught things, and then also you can, in to some degree, identify potential issues. I mean, certainly you can talk to athletic training staff and that, but like, okay, we're going to even do something pressing overhead. So the baseball example you mentioned, like, okay, that really stands out with that pitcher. Doing, let's say I always like with baseball specifically, I always like doing a block of front squats before we racked cleans. And so, one, yeah, you identify some that might really have a poor front rack, but then also most often it improves a lot over a month. You front squat twice a week, so you front squat 8 times, and especially if they're tight, they might complain, and you might need to, do this and tell them to push their elbows up and let it sit where it needs to sit and all that good stuff. And have I had athletes that they've had a surgery or simply can't get in a position that I feel is safe to where they can catch, whether it be on, for cleaning the front rack or overhead. Sure. And then we just do the pull or we do some other variation. But I don't think it's an either or type scenario. And I think for sure, almost, I actually, you would have to have an injury situation and a movement problem that was beyond just weightlifting to where you just couldn't do anything. You can't do a pull from the power position or something like that. Um, and so I think that how you teach it is important. And I also think that, you know, the idea of workable, useful technique that uh, doesn't have to be perfect day one, but you need to know what to look for and kind of what to ingrain. And I certainly, as a strength coach those movements in various ways different than I would a weightlifter, where that's their sport, right? So it's much more technical. There are things I'm looking for that are in so much more detail. And depending on the situation, I might be more patient, hesitant with a weightlifter, or it might be the opposite. And so it's what are the goals? What are we trying to accomplish? And to the what are we trying to accomplish? That's within that understanding of where are we at in their development, where are we at in their sequence of things. And so mapping that out. I mean, you mentioned in season, like we talked about this last week, the difference between fall and spring sports. That's a factor, right? Like if you have an athlete that's been doing these movements for 6 months, then going into the spring, you might feel more comfortable doing something, doing a light, hang power snatch from the power position versus, well, if this is volleyball or soccer where they just showed up, uh, we might just do the pull.
Yeah. No, I mean, that definitely makes sense. That's kind of the kind of the route that we've taken for the most part. Um, All right, so I was kind of telling you off air. This is something that I think is going to be pretty cool to do. See how it goes. And like I said, there's really no wrong answers. And just for the listener's sake, like I'm going to essentially give you 2 to 3 different either exercises or training modalities or philosophies or even sports science tools, metrics.
Mhm.
And your kind of job is to buy, meaning that you the your experience, your anecdotal experience, other people's anecdotal evidence, and then what the actual maybe research supports. And again, some of this there may not be research to truly support it yet. Buy is that you're like, this is legit. This is a legit training modality, little legit training concept. Sell is not really doesn't seem legit, doesn't have any evidence at all, anecdotal or scientific to support it yet. And then trade would be the other option where you can be like, you know what, I think it's a good option, but I think there may be a better option, right? And you can even trade one of the options for one of the other options, if that makes sense, right?
So
All
I
right,
was
so
gonna say, so just so I, for like each set, I'll get three.
some of them there may be two, two, yeah, some of them may be two, some of them may be three.
Okay,
So,
but
all right, we'll do.
I'll get them all at the same time.
Yes, yeah. So we'll start out
Got
with this. We'll start out with this. All right. And again, this is all in the realm of like sports and athletic performance, like athlete development. All right. And again, I just think I think you'll have a unique perspective on this. So I'm interested here. All right. So buy, sell, or trade box squats, right? West side barbell, like sitting down on a box squats,
Mhm.
Zercher squats, Fred Hatfield hand supported squats. So box squats, Zercher hand supported squats.
For the hand supported, can you describe that?
So that's like a safety bar, like a yoke bar, hands on the peg, help, sitting down, like you're using that to kind of help your posture.
Gotcha. Um, so I mean, I'm definitely in the back squat category, the biggest fan of just regular old back squats. And I think all three of these options have their place. So like selling any of them, I don't.
Okay.
Um, if I were so okay, actually, because you gave me three, I feel like I got to go one for each.
Okay.
I'm gonna sell the hand supported, and I will say that with I need to say I've never implemented it, and I've seen it where they rely on their arms too much.
I
And so
definitely think that,
I'm sure it can be
yes,
coached in a way like a
yes,
lot of things.
yes.
Um, I think Zercher, I for a sport like wrestling, I could see more value in. Um, so I'll do the trades in the middle, and then I'll do box in my biased mind of I could make that the most like a regular squat, and to the box squat. I mean, this is kind of similar to what I just said about the hand supported. Um, would want to see like a touch and go versus the relax on the box and uh relax and then tighten back up.
Okay.
And and and,
Yeah,
and
that
I
makes
don't
sense.
know, maybe it's worth mentioning. Um, this isn't exactly about box squat, but a lot of our developmental program at the high schools will use a ball underneath
Med ball.
them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I think there's definitely in my mind, there's definitely a difference between like that type of box squat or like to a med ball where you're like using that like a coaching cue, like hitting depth,
Yeah.
versus like the traditional kind of like west side, like sit
Yeah.
down, relax hip flexors. So I think there's definitely nuance there, and that I probably should have maybe been clear. But I think I can agree with all those. I think that makes sense. I mean, I personally like. I'm a huge Zercher fan. I love Zercher squats. I don't know. I think it's just the way I'm built. Again, I'm also like I'm better at deadlifting than I am squatting. So I think having that load in front, and we do it with our guys a lot. We do it with our wrestlers, but where I've actually used it the most with football guys is obviously number one. If a guy's got an injured shoulder or wrist or something like that, they can have that front load, that anterior load, to kind of replace a front squat. But I've actually noticed a lot of our guys who have like limitations with like their shoulder girdle and like their thoracic mobility can't really sit into like a full, especially like an Olympic style, like upright posture, like back squat. You throw the bar in front of them and like it automatically cleans up their squatting mechanics. Like it's kind of crazy how taking the bar from here to here like can help somebody keep a vertical torso and vertical shin angles. But I agree with your thought process on that. I think that's cool answers. All right, so you kind of already mentioned this one a little bit. This is just two different ones, and then I'll have a follow up to it. So for athlete, let's say athlete profiling, not necessarily athlete monitoring, athlete profiling, peak power versus relative power, buy, sell, or trade those two. And again, you can always buy both, you can always sell both, you can always trade them for something else as well.
So, because I think you could make a case that I said that thing about how, some sports, like a pitcher, for example,
Yep.
just absolute power. But relative power is a safe for all situation. And I mean, you'll still learn a lot about relative power, right? Like if you have someone that has really, really impressive absolute power, yes, their body mass is the factor to the relative power. But I think relative power is a pretty good starting point. So I would buy relative power and trade absolute power. And one of the things I would say to that is for the idea of scaling, that allows you to do a couple of things. One, it allows you to compare across various body masses, right? In football, for example, you have massive differences in body mass on a roster. And then for the sake of or factoring in body mass can change, right? So okay, they got stronger, they got more powerful. Well, did getting bigger contribute a large piece to that? And so there's sort of a tracking factor over time.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that because it's one of the things that we've only had this happen a few times, but we've had situations where like a football player will like either gain 5 to 10 pounds or lose 5 to 10 pounds, and like their relative power will kind of go up and down reflect because again we're guesstimating relative power because we're taking jump height, and we're using like the Sayers equation to calculate it. But because jump height is such a factor in that, like if you go from a 25-inch jump at 185 to a 24-inch jump at 195, like your relative power actually goes like way up, even though your jump height went down. So like it's something where like the athletes sometimes get confused. They're like, well, my average jump has been going down. I'm like, yeah, but you've also gained like 10, 15, 20 pounds. So you're moving a larger mass, across that same distance. So no, I think that's solid.
One thing I should add, relative power is still important to some degree in all cases, right?
Yeah.
Like even so we would say like shot put, between the two, it's probably more absolute power. At the same time, they still overcome their body mass. So if there's movement, it is to some degree. It's just sometimes from a profiling standpoint, we kind of draw a little bit of a line for the sake of how you would analyze something, give feedback. And so, yeah, that's why I would buy relative power.
Okay. No, I like that. That's a good conversation. All right. This one's definitely a little bit more unique. And I guess there could be a concentric and an eccentric portion here. Or like a braking and a propulsive phase, at least from a force plate metric for both of these. So we'll say eccentric and concentric impulse, eccentric and concentric rate of force development.
So, I mean, I'd definitely buy both. RFD and impulse for the concentric. One of the things I think is important is assessing reliability of those. Sometimes we found it to be reliable and sometimes we haven't. It's actually, I probably should have mentioned this when I was talking about static jumps. Um, uh, it's a safe bet the concentric will be reliable for those metrics, because you're making them, 90-degree knee angle, you're having them start at the same place every time, you're standardizing it versus the self-selected depth. And so sometimes one trial to the next with just a little bit of inconsistency can make that not reliable.
Yeah.
Maybe this is me just being a bad sports scientist. I've never done anything with eccentric impulse very directly. So I guess I'd sell that. And so I mean, both of those are useful from the just the time standpoint of, and I think this might, I was about to say not to belabor, but it's actually exactly what I'm doing. So, we talk about all the things we've been throwing out: impulse, RFD, power, relative power, jump height, all that. Those are discrete variables where each one of them is an equation. We mathematically, different things go into them and we pull those out. And you mentioned having a ton of metrics, right? You have all these discrete metrics. Jump strategy is really, really interesting from a monitoring standpoint, in that the idea that an athlete can, like, if jump height's the outcome, for example, produce the same jump height. So outcome's the same, 1 week to the next, but their strategy, in other words, how they got to that point, changed.
Right.
And so, to make this answer really complicated, if rate of force development eccentrically, rate of force development, or excuse me, impulse eccentric, those things go into the time factor. And, generally speaking, as an athlete gets fatigued, they will add time to
Spend more
the
time.
jump.
Yeah. Take longer to jump. Yeah. And that's where I guess, like, that's why I'm wondering how important those things are. And I don't know if I thought about it in the way that you described it, of the sense of, like, they are probably more sensitive in terms of, like, being able to be reliable data points, because, even think of, like, if an athlete just, like, they stub their pinky toe. Well, now they might not get off the ground as quick. So now impulse is going to change, but jump height might actually still be the same because they've still found a different strategy around it. So, like, is that because their performance, their neuromuscular performance is actually different, or just because they chose a different jump strategy that day because they stubbed their pinky toe like the day before? So I think now that you say that, it definitely has me thinking about, just the overall significance of those metrics, and not that they're insignificant, but just the reliability in terms of their significance.
So what I would say is, it's to, like, one of the first questions you asked, like, how do I know athlete fatigue? What do I tell coach? That type of thing. So tell a story, right? There's different ways that you could do a waveform analysis, like Mike DeLong did, a student of mine, for his dissertation, where it's the entire curve. You can take certain variables that have time factors, and even literally just time, descent, ascent, all of those things, and say, okay, we have like 5 or 6. It's not so much one is the gold metric and ignore all of the others. But it's also not look at all of them independently. This is a time factor here.
Right.
And so all of these things are pointing to, they are needing more time to get to the same
Right. Yeah.
outcome. And I mean, you can make it that type of conversation, very sports specific and this is a bit more detailed and nuanced from a assessment standpoint of, if you got two people that perform the exact same jump height and power output, but one of them does it a whole lot quicker,
Yeah.
right? That's very valuable as far as what goes into team sport, for example, where getting the work done quicker.
Yeah,
Uh,
the time constraints of the task. Yeah, and that's I know
mhm,
Darren and I have had conversations about like time to take off, right? It's one of those where
mhm.
if two athletes both jump, whatever. I'm still in inches mode, but like you say, 30 centimeters. They both jump 30 centimeters, but one of them does it in, 3/4 of the time as the other athlete. That athlete's probably going to have better success. You would assume, at least. Skill still dependent, but you would assume from a performance standpoint they would have better success because they achieve the same task in a more efficient, I guess you could say, manner. Um,
This is a bit of a sideways indirect, but maybe worth mentioning. Like, if you take pretty good sprinters and then you compare them to elite sprinters, foot touchdown, force production, impulse uh, is the same. The difference is one is
More
this,
force and
right?
less
So
time,
it's
and yeah,
very, very vertical,
yeah,
less time. The other person needs more time, and
yeah,
it's much less height on it.
right, yeah. No, I think it's a really cool conversation. And again, it's something that I look at of like, eventually being able to maybe like bucket some kids into, and we didn't get to really talk about this, but it's something I think about bucketing kids, athletes into, especially in the off season. Like again, I think football guys. Okay, are you a guy that we need to focus on like just overall, absolute strength, absolute power development? Or are you a guy that we need to work on more of like your reactive strength, and trying to improve your impulse via more force, less time? Or are you an athlete that you're already very reactive? We need to just get you stronger in general, like a freshman wide receiver versus a senior defensive line, right? Like those guys are going to potentially need different training. Um, all right. This one, I'm very interested in this one. Um, velocity based training. So kind of basing your training off of bar speed,
Mm-hmm.
um, French contrast training. So kind of that Bondarchuk, like, you get, your heavy strength exercise, moderate, plyometric, um, body weight, and then a lightened plyometric, and positional, I guess you could call it like maximal isometric training. So like overcoming ISO. So like, a rack pull below the knee, a rack pull above the knee, a rack pull like mid thigh. That kind of idea. So velocity based training, that whole kind of just philosophy, which again, we're implementing a little bit at Fairmont. French contrast, and then positional isometric. I know those are not all, they're not even related really. They're kind of different, but just as a way to kind of approach all three and just usefulness.
Yeah, so I'm going to sell velocity based training. Not that I don't think it has. You can certainly measure velocity and it meaningfully impact your coaching,
Yep.
and the details of it. But I uh, would not base my training plan around that, and that'd be a whole discussion unto itself. I'll buy the French contrast, and I'll trade I wanted to say functional isometrics, which is not exactly what you said, but I actually,
Positional.
yeah, I think that's I think trade is the perfect place to put that one because I mean, I wouldn't base a whole training plan around. I wouldn't do all the exercises that way, but um, I certainly think there's value in doing them. In fact, probably one of my favorite, focusing on the first pull of a clean or snatch is uh, off of the place in the safety bars. So they're inside the rack. Place safety bars right at the knee, and so they do the first pull just like as they normally would, and then you teach them to, you want it to not hit it, pop off, and then stick it. You want it to stick it and,
Stay.
yeah, and keep pulling on that thing for a couple seconds. And there's some cool technique aspects to that, like you pass the knee pretty quickly, right? And so this can, I think, a lot of athletes have uh, knee a little bit too forward. Maybe their back is a little rounded. So yeah, I like it. I just like, that wouldn't be the
What about
cornerstone.
and I want to have a follow up to velocity based training here in a second, but what about triphasic training, like the collegiates, like where you're doing a 2 to 3 4 week block of you're focusing just on eccentrics, and I guess you could even just call this tempo training in general. Because he didn't invent tempo training, he just kind of packaged it into that triphasic model. You're doing like a 3 to 4 week block of eccentric training, a 3 to 4 week block of isometric, positional isometrics, and then kind of finishing with that concentric block where you're kind of throwing in the French contrast concept. Is that something that you've played around with? Like you feel
So
like a benefits to buy, sell, or
I have
trade it?
done, I have done uh concentric only stuff like dead stop squats, and certainly with, with pulls. Um uh we've done eccentric things in various ways, like eccentric accentuated, um tempo, and then come up. And then I've done plenty of isometric testing. I've only done I'm blanking on who would have wrote that book from way back, weightlifting book, old Russian text. Functional isometrics we've used plenty. One of the things I've read, it's been a long time, but I read the triphasic book. I think for the isometric training, it's important to distinguish: are you doing something where you're holding a position, or you're pulling against something you can't move?
Right. Yeah. Like yielding versus overcoming. Yeah. And we definitely do a little bit of both at Fairmont. I don't think you can, I've done the Cal Deet stuff. I've done the triphasic stuff. I don't know if I would base an entire training program off of it. And again, part of that is also just the training age of our athletes too. I think where like the tempo stuff comes into play, kind of what you're saying is like, I think there's nothing better than, especially a kid that's never squatted before, is making them do a tempo squat for two reasons. Number one,
Mhm.
it slows it down for them, and for the coach, it slows it down. Now you can really kind of see, okay, at this point, this is when you start to lose like your, ankle, hip, knee mobility, whatever it is, you start to drift onto your toes, your heels, whatever it is, you can kind of really slow the movement down.
Tempos to a med ball is like high school
One on
S&C
one. Yeah.
101.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. I definitely would agree with that. What about accommodating resistance? So bands, chains, kind of the West Side barbell dynamic effort method. Adding that Fred Hatfield, I believe he talked about too, compensatory acceleration training. The idea that as you get to the top of a movement, you naturally are going to decelerate the bar, and using bands and chains to kind of overcome that. Is that something that you buy, sell, trade, you've utilized, you feel like it has value?
So I'm not a powerlifting coach, and I've never coached a power lifter. In the most black or white, black and white, I should say, lens of that, I don't know how much. Well, I've never done that exactly what you're describing, because I can picture that. Like as a strength coach, I think when you get into very specific, like uh, locking out a squat, a deadlift, I can picture the benefit of that. But like I just mentioned a second ago, the eccentric accentuated stuff. Um, we've, especially with stronger athletes, have done a good bit with,
Yeah.
to where you're going down. Um, it depends on the percentage in the protocol and all that, but like 130, 140%. And well, there's different. I actually, weight releasers are great if you don't have the help. I've always liked actually the get the pins and have a person on each side and strip them off.
Slot a plate off. Yeah. Well, I know that's a lot of what Dr. Sukamel up at Pitt, he's doing a lot of stuff with the accentuated eccentric, isn't he? I believe like he's putting out some
Mhm.
research with that. Yeah. I mean, again, I personally use bands and chains. We do it a lot. I think there's two factors. Number one, I do think the compensatory acceleration aspect, and it kind of teaches you to drive through the bar. And I think there has been some research coming out showing that at least from force plate metrics, which I'll probably kind of wrap up with a question about that. Um, I think also just our athletes just enjoy it because it's just something different. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
when you're in the middle of football season, you've been back squatting for like 8 weeks and then we throw bands and chains on there. It's just something different. Just gets them just a different mental stimulus. Sounds cool, looks cool. It just, again, going back to just enthusiasm in the weight room. Like that's a big factor, of just getting kids to buy in a little bit.
Well, and
Um,
something I would add to that is just, you know, uh, we would both agree. I know back squat is a great exercise. Well, how do we have variation
yep.
to it, right? There's only so many options.
Right. Right.
To where
Um,
I'm a big fan, especially in season, of partials out of the rack in
makes
different
sense. Yeah.
different places.
Yeah. No. Um, Real quick for the from the velocity based training stuff, and this is something that me and Josh have been playing around with a little bit, because it's something else that I'm thinking about, kind of from a testing battery to an extent. And again, I think there's definitely some variation there. But like, for example, what Josh and I have been doing is the last like month, we've taken the same weight and we've taken our average. So let's say we're doing bench press or hang power clean or squat, whatever exercise it is, and we're the biggest benefit for me for velocity based training is just up here. Like, it's teaching you to just try to be more aggressive with the bar, even with Olympic lifts. Like I'm able to
Mhm.
get under the bar and move the bar a lot faster when I'm getting that external feedback. If my, let's say, for bench press, my velocity was, for at um a standardized weight. That's what me and Josh are basically doing, a standardized weight. He's stronger, so he's going to move that lighter weight to him, heavier to me. He's going to move it faster. Again, that's just the strength curve and how it works. But what we've noticed is we've done the same lifts the last 4 weeks. We're doing 4 reps on bench press, and then we take the average of that velocity, right? We've both gotten, quote unquote, faster with the same load, right? Do you think, and again, this obviously depends on how much you're bought into the idea of velocity based training, I guess, but do you think that is actually, we've just got more technically proficient at that exercise, or do you think that over the last 3 or 4 weeks we've actually had legit neuromuscular adaptations because of the velocity based training, where we are actually inherently now more powerful in those exercises? And we saw it really big this week. We actually did that lift yesterday. We saw it really big this week where my power cleans and my bench press were, an entire, like, 0.10 meters per second or more faster, which is, in my opinion, probably a significant difference. Is that more of and you can make this argument for any adaptation,
Yeah.
technical proficiency versus neuromuscular adaptation. I mean, do you think that that's something that would be a legit, like, study in and of itself of looking at something like that?
So I think there's two answers to I mean, provided technique is stable and effort is there every time.
Right. Which I would think
If
for the
Yeah,
training age
yeah, yeah,
that Josh and
yeah.
I have, I think it would be, yes. But yeah,
So
good.
based on that, I think there's good reason to believe some type of neuromuscular adaptation. And I mean, to that, like, we as coaches do exactly what you just described of technical proficiency, neuromuscular. Like, we put things in categories because it's helpful for us to do, but those are related.
Right.
The question though of, did that happen because of the velocity based training, which to that is it velocity based training if you're is it as simple as having that on the bar and constantly, after each set, looking at it and kind of competing with yourself?
Hmm.
um that's that would be I would say you could do that. And I wouldn't, it's not that, is that or isn't it velocity based training, in that, okay, like, I wrote out a training plan, I'm just collecting this information and I'm aware of it. Maybe is it influencing something set after set? I'm now going to compete with myself, that idea. um but that's not like a threshold fall off, right? Where I'm
Yeah.
going to do
Yeah.
it and I'm
Exactly.
going to cut it, or I'm going to use it to
Yes.
dictate the
Yes.
next load. And I think, I mean, like so many uh conversations in the S&C world, right? Like, um there's that context. I mean, as a weightlifting coach, and even with some of the research I do, kinematic data of a barbell is really useful, and I get really, really into it. My mind, when I hear velocity-based training, is more I would suggest to not let it dictate everything.
I
And
see what
I
you're saying.
think
No,
that's where I would really, really caution people. You put together what you think is a good training plan that you put a lot of thought into, and in some way is it integrated, and there's different ways of doing that. Like we're peaking and we're doing a taper, and we're doing like a relatively heavy but still call it a speed squat, and we're going to, okay, once it gets to this place, then you're done. That's different than, okay, well, I'm going to let this decide how
yeah.
many
Well,
sets and reps you're going to do.
yeah, and it kind of has me thinking like, yeah, you're right. Like I'm calling it velocity based training, but really it's probably like velocity integrated training is really what me
Yeah.
and Josh are doing right now. Like it's integrated into what we're already doing. We're already going to do those sets of power clean with that prescribed weight. We're not going to go down in weight or up in weight. We're just trying to move that weight faster than what we did last week. So it's kind of like the velocity is kind of like a secondary to the percentage prescription already, versus the other way around, right? Using it, and again, we've used it a little bit in that at Fairmont as well. Um, so I think that's definitely probably a little bit of apples to oranges the way that I kind of asked it, I guess. So I think that, yeah, that
But
makes sense.
I think that's, you hear VBT and different people think
Yeah,
different different
yeah,
things. And
exactly,
so,
exactly.
I would say, like when I said sell, if it's just buy or sell, my mind goes to, you're going to let it dictate the program. You're going to let it, be somewhat robotic. I mean, I said the thing about stable technique, but especially if you're talking weightlifting movements, there's such a technique aspect to that. I've seen this. I did an internship years ago where, I mean, one of the issues was it was peak and not average, but it was really messing up their clean pulls. These were actually really, really strong competitive athletes. And so they're chasing this number, and instead of having a good transition and nice, vertical second pull, they start pulling it early, and they start whacking it they start hipping the bar, because right when it
Yeah,
takes off their hip, and so, like so many things, it depends on how you're implementing it and just good coaching.
yeah, no, I agree. And it's definitely something that we've seen too. And that's something that I get very fearful of. If like, I don't want to just throw this bar, but that's why we really haven't done it for deadlifts yet, because the last thing I want is a kid trying to rip a deadlift off the ground and then just technique goes out the window. And then now they're just using, they're doing a freaking back extension instead of a deadlift.
One thing I'd mention is, I, as someone that works with so many, like, really, really developing strength coaches, undergraduates specifically, I really worry about coaches not becoming good coaches first,
First. Yep.
and
100%.
and being so in the iPad or whatever it might be, and being able to use your eyes and process the information, and not just, okay, tell me, computer, how
What to
to
do.
how
Yeah.
to think about this, and what to tell the athlete.
Well, and it's kind of funny. So I was going to ask you that question about something, young coach advice for young coaches, since you work with so many young coaches, so you kind of answered that. And something I actually had this discussion with like our sports nutrition interns. I'm like, look, to an extent, athletes don't need strength coaches like for our brains, like for like regurgitating the information we learned in a textbook anymore. They don't need a
Mhm.
dietitian to regurgitate what you learned in your classroom and in your textbooks anymore, because they can just go to ChatGPT and be like, hey, write me a football in-season training program, write me an in-season diet program. Where they need us is they need us from like the personal standpoint. They need us to build that relationship with them, get them to understand, hey, here's what ChatGPT has spit you out, but how's that actually going to make you better? How do we monitor your progress? How do we make sure that when you come in that day and you're not excited to train, if you didn't have a strength coach to motivate you and fire you up and watch your technique and see that you're kind of just going through the motions today and be able to pull you aside and talk to you and figure out what's going on and how to get you better and remind you of what your goals are, like that's where our value is never going to go away. Like you can't have an AI model, you know, watch somebody walk through the weight room and just see how their demeanor is different than it was the last time they were in, right? And the same with the nutrition. It's like ChatGPT isn't going to ask you, well, why do you want to lose weight? Well, how's that going to make you a better offensive lineman? I mean, how's this going to happen? How, how do you eat? Do you eat emotionally? Do you eat because you're stressed out? Like, what's your, I mean, it's not going to be able to ask you those things that the human element that us as coaches have. So I agree with you. And that's, I know we talked a lot about sports science on here, but I'm still a big believer in like, if I got rid of every single piece of sports science at Fairmont, like nothing about our training would actually change all that much.
Mhm.
Most of what we're using, like the exercise that we do, the weights that we do, the prescription, the way that our training sessions flow, the energy, the effort, the enthusiasm, the rep integrity that we do, most of that wouldn't change. Most of what we're doing for using sports science for is just to kind of reward the kids for their hard work and confirm that we're hopefully moving in the right direction, right? Like I can see which kids are fast. I can go watch football practice and tell which kids are fast. The getting their velocity on a 30-yard sprint just confirms, like it rewards them by actually putting a number by their efforts, right? Getting their velocity based device to go up, or their vertical jump height to go up, that just rewards them for the work that they're putting in and all those squats that they didn't want to do at 6 a.m. in the off season, right? So I'm one of those where like, you know, we're still 99% human element. That 1% seems like a lot, like in the sports science thing, but I feel like it's still, it's still second to just being a good coach and being a good observer. So I would end there because I feel like that's a great spot to end. But I do have two questions I want to ask you.
Okay.
Something I've noticed a lot. Actually, let's end on the other on that one. What do you think about the enhanced games?
Ooh. Um, so I have several thoughts on it. I was really surprised, and I found out this a little bit before actually seeing. I watched just a little bit of it. I watched some of the weightlifting on whatever that was at YouTube.
Yeah, I think
Um,
yeah.
so I'd heard some stuff a while back about how, the enhanced games really is more about this being able to do this long term study for like health and wellness, and we can uh prescribe reasonable levels of various androgens and whatever
Right,
else. And
right,
um they agree. I think the idea is not just like during their competitive time, but further in life, so we can see like long term what happens.
right,
And because we know there's several studies that make it very clear, like really high androgen use and super physiological levels of testosterone. And it can, there's been studies on deceased bodybuilders all dead at early ages, and okay, these are problems caused by excessive drug use. Um and so that was when I first heard that, I thought that was interesting, independent of the whole moral thing and what how it might if influence affect. We're seeing in culturally. It was a couple months ago. It was like the Saturday morning or Sunday morning news. They did there's CBS or like one of the network shows on how desensitized younger, I mean, maybe not even athletes, are to whether it's peptides and drugs. And I could, it highlighted one high school age kid specifically. Uh, that was pretty sad to see. Um, and so, there's several things to consider, but after seeing it, and I know people, you can say, well, maybe the people that are winning are also on drugs. And I think, if you are interested in history type stuff, going down that rabbit hole can be something to see. If
yeah,
listeners whether it's the book on the East German doping machine, whether it's Icarus, the
Icarus, yep.
fantastic
Yep.
Netflix
Documentary, yep.
documentary. But the craziest thing to me with seeing the results of that stuff was seeing how poor some of the results were, to where, if you really wanted to make it the all drug Olympics, like was it Hans Franz or the old SNL skit, the all drug Olympics?
Yeah.
Um, they're not getting the in their prime people
Right. They're
to,
getting, like
to
Wes Kitts, who's, been retired from Olympic weightlifting for a handful of years, and he's trying to come
yeah,
back.
I want to say there was someone that, like, I don't want to even guess at the money, but it was tens of thousands of dollars for doing. I mean, we have a kid at Morgantown High School, I think, ran a 10.7. I think it was a
Yeah.
10.8, got blast or something, and still got
Yeah.
money. And so I would assume that is a very bad look as far as people just wanting to see records broke in that.
Right.
Um, so my mind then goes to, well, are they going to is it going to go on long enough to where you can
They're
see
gonna
some of the,
pull athletes that are actually in their prime, that maybe be, you know, that's my thought, is that instead of it getting the kind of the over the hill athletes, or the athletes that have already failed a drug test, and are like the sprinter. I don't think he was actually
early?
even, yeah, I don't think he was actually enhanced, because he's trying to get back into
That's what he
the
said. Yeah, I
Olympic
saw
testing
that.
pool, but he had already failed a drug test. So I think if they can stick around for another year or two, are they going to be able to steal, maybe, like, you look at, like, okay, here's the top 5 sprinters in America. Well, only maybe 4 of them actually make it to the Olympics. So that number 5 guy, are they going to get him? Not number 5 guy from 10 years ago. Like, are they going to go get the number 5 guy, whatever it is? The other thing, then, it's funny that you were saying that, because I saw a thing where the actual behind the scenes of the whole idea of the enhanced games. Because, again, I'm one of those where, like, I want to see humans do freaky stuff. So I don't really have a problem with it. I want to see guys deadlift and run sub whatever 9.5. I'm as long as everybody's open about what's going on, I don't really personally have a problem with it. Um, but what I kind of heard was it's really more of a ploy, like you mentioned, to get people to start buying. Like, basically, the enhanced games is a glorified supplement company, is
Yeah, I
essentially
mean,
what it
we're
is.
we're
It's
we're seeing the increase in, call it fly by night wellness, get testosterone. Don't actually see an endocrinologist
right.
that would probably never do any of those things, especially I mean, this is by no means an expert in any of this stuff that I'm talking about right now, but the basic idea of, like, you don't want to give someone 3 different things, because then, okay, now we need to more closely measure things from a health
Right.
standpoint. Well, okay, this went off track. Well, what caused it? Was it which one of the 3, or was it the interaction between them?
Right.
Well,
Right.
we don't
Right. Right.
know,
Right.
because we don't know. Um, and I think definitely people are more desensitized with taking, again, various peptides and different things. And um, like, from what I understand, yes, an endocrinologist might, okay, your testosterone is really, really low, so we need to bump it up a little bit. It's not going to probably be it's going to be, we're below the line of low. We're going to get you here, not we're going to optimize and get you as far up as we can without it going into that super physiological
Right.
range. Yeah, I was surprised to hear all that a little bit ago. Um, and yeah, I would be really surprised if they were able to pull, um, you know, uh, someone that is like a top 5 sprinter in the U.S.
Right.
or
I mean,
something like that.
I think that's the only way that they're going to ever actually, like, do what they set out to do. I mean, is doing something like that, because you get a guy that was a top 5 sprinter 5 years ago. He's not, it's not the same. Let's wrap up with this, because this is, again, another kind of can of worms question. And I'll be honest with you, I've been seeing a lot more. Like, I don't know if you follow, like, the strength. I think you do. You've talked about it before. I think the Strength Coach Job Network, like, and all those job
Mm.
postings and stuff they post. They'll post like a D1 job, assistant strength coach at a Division 1, Power 4 Division 1, starting salary is somewhere between 35 and $45,000. Like, what do we, you're part of the NSCA, you've been part of it for a long time, and I'll see people get on there and comment, hey, NSCA, hey, um, uh, NSCCA, or, like,
Mhm.
we got to do better. We got to figure out like what can we as a strength and conditioning culture, society, brotherhood, sisterhood, like whatever you want to call it, like family, what can we be doing better? Because the thing is, like, if I was 25 and I'm just out of grad school and I'm looking for a job, like in Stanford, one of the jobs I remember seeing was Stanford posted a job for $40,000. Like that's literally no money in California. Like you'll barely be able to fill up your gas tank in California. Like I would still take that job though. Like if you know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like I'm a young coach. I need a job. I need to get experience. Like how do we combat the fact that there are more coaches than there are jobs so that these schools know that these hiring committees know that they can hire somebody that somebody's willing to take it, but also give those kids the opportunity to have a job, but also not completely like bastardize our profession based off of like starting salaries.
So one thing that always bothers me is when I'll hear athletic directors say, well, this is the going rate. So in other words, like we looked at our peer institutions, for example, what's like the entry
I've
level.
I've literally heard
So,
those words mentioned to me about 2 weeks ago. Just I won't say anything more than that, but I've heard that and well, what I'll say is there's no other peer institutions in Division II athletics and in the state of West Virginia that do what I do.
mhm.
So that's one of those things where like that's the argument that I know what you're going to say, and that's the argument that I've also heard. But how do you
Well,
compare something to something that doesn't exist? But anyway, go ahead.
so a couple of things. One is if you're the institution, I don't think it's best practice to simply look at what's the least we can get someone here for. What are we trying to build, and let's build it with purpose. And to that, if you look at the crazy, particularly in Division I, sport coach salaries, it's not as there's this ginormous spread for a whole bunch of sports, right? And it's not as simple as more dollars means more wins. In some cases, certainly people are attached to being successful. Um, and I think that there's a whole lot of wasteful spending that occurs. And I'm not, I don't uh, pretend to understand that world of all the budget stuff and all that, but I think that one, if you're always paying people, and it's not just strength coaches, athletic trainers, I think is very, very similar. One, think about culture. Okay. When people feel appreciated, when people are taken care of, when people feel like you're generally, we can't always give everybody everything they want, but like, I really do think my boss is looking out for me. Um, do I feel comfortable even going to them asking for, hey, can you pay for this conference, or can you pay for my research, or whatever it is? Um, and we saw that. I think a good example of that would be when COVID hit. I saw at a bunch of places mass exodus of athletic trainers, and a lot of it was uh, they put a lot of COVID related things on them, and I think part of it would have been based on just personal story here or there. Like, if you're going to pay me as low as you possibly can, when I'm then asked to do things, right, it changes. And I think most people, like you're saying, when you're young and you're passionate, and I think this whole thing kind of takes advantage of that, right? Like, you could go into whether it's PT, AT, medical, something, you can go into coaching, S&C. You don't have to go into collegiate, but probably almost all the people that do that, they're passionate about it, right? It's not, well, if I did this, I would make $10,000 more. It's, I want to do this. I want to work with athletes. I want that performance based. Personally, I mean, I would have interviewed for a position that would have been minor league slash professional, work with both depending on when, and it paid low 20s. And the only reason why I didn't, I would have canceled the going out there because I got a job offer at the College of Charleston, a faculty position, and that was completely based on I probably should be within reasonable distance of, at the time, my fiance. But if it would have been just, if I'd have been single, professional sport, awesome opportunity, work with really good people, I don't care
Yeah.
what it pays. And we're seeing, these entry level sports science positions, people with PhDs taking these really poor paying jobs just because you're either like a director or you have these entry level jobs in both sports science and S&C where, they're able to skirt around, not if, well, we just don't make them full time.
Yeah.
So it's hourly, it's not even official, it's not full time work. And so hopefully the military will help some, right?
Yeah.
H2F is hiring, you don't even need a master's degree.
Yep.
Um, uh, but I don't know what would actually force the change. I know the NSCA started putting out that annual report.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and that's kind of what the where I feel like it's because again, like I said, just not to go back to my situation because that's to an extent like you know I've never asked for a raise in my life, but but there's an aspect where once you have a family and a wife and a kid, like now things are you do start thinking about things a little bit differently. Salary does start to matter a little bit more than just passion and purpose and those
mhm.
things. Um, but it's one of those where like there's not any other D2 school in the state has a full-time strength coach like Fairmont State does. So I'm very lucky in that sense. But it's one of those things where what I would like to see is the NSCA enforce, because one of the things that we run into at the Division II level is the NSCA, sorry, the NCAA has a policy that every single school
Mhm.
that does strength training has to have a certified strength conditioning specialist on staff. Well, I can tell you right now, not to throw schools under the bus, but I can tell you right now that the schools in the conference that we play in don't all have a CSCS person and or don't always have that person actually in the weight room, actually monitoring like what the athletes are doing, whether they're in there coaching. Because what the way they get around the language is you have to have a CSCS person on staff that can oversee the programs that are being written. Well, if that CSCS is an assistant football coach, he's never stepping in the weight room when the tennis team's in there training. Like they could be in there doing who knows what. So I would think that what we need to do, and obviously we're on the West Virginia State NSCA board, is something we maybe need to bring up as a committee like ourselves, is we actually make these schools start to police themselves and enforce that rule. And that has to be a full-time position. And that full-time position has to be some sort of equivalent salary to a regular head coaching job, right?
So it's small world. When I was the year I was at Glenville State was when that division, they implemented I think a year earlier in Division I, and then when it hit Division II was the would have been 15, 16. And I actually would have, and those that comes out of that national meeting of athletic directors in January, and they knew that that was probably coming. And so I had a student in class in the fall who had been on the football team, and sharp kid, and was able to pass his CSCS in the fall, and they made him the linebackers coach in the spring, and he did strength and conditioning for the football team, but to everything you're describing,
Yeah,
and I don't know what their situation is now. I know Nolan Harvath would have been like a director type
yeah,
when he was
yeah,
there.
yeah,
But I would add to everything you just said of I think there's certainly value in a place for paid interns, but as far as developing strength coaches, I've really hated to see what seems to be uh, uh, a reduction in the amount of graduate assistants and I know you have a GA, which is fantastic. You know, it's just, there's something to that 2 year situation where, you know, you're past the honeymoon period. I get so many applications where it's driven young developing strength coaches. But I look at it, it's like they've done, oh, great. You know, they've been at 3 good places, which is good, but it's all within like 9 months.
Yeah,
You know, it's
exactly.
summer and then fall, spring. Um, and so there's something to just like getting past the exciting stuff and then being in the slog and then coming back and doing it again and getting to be with the same staff and to see the same things in the same place. From what I understand, I'm sure it's cheaper to do the internship stuff with, you know, different schools have different ways of doing the tuition side of things. But I, I don't mean to, well, this is a pessimistic view until things really change where people who aren't like how we were when we were younger, or like how a lot of young ones now that are passionate about S&C, I think it will actually take, because I thought H2F in that whole situation might shift things some. At least as far as I've seen, it hasn't.
Yeah.
And so I think it'll take like the next generation of more savvy, aware than you and I would have been, and more, you know, kind of thinking like you might more as a 30-year-old, as a 22, 23-year-old, which it's never going to be exactly the same because it just can't be. It's different life places. Um, but, you know, this stuff gets talked about more openly, and there's probably with social media and just information with you all the time, more of an awareness for the younger ones now, in that I wouldn't have, we, you know, probably same experience for yourself, right? Like it's a very just organic over time. Oh, well, like I need to start thinking about, maybe I don't want to be in a situation where I'm traveling all the time with this one team, to where when you're 22, 23, it's like, yes, I want to do like more time
Right.
with the team, or yeah, I want to do
Yeah.
that.
Right. No, no, I definitely agree. I think it's one of those where, and I think because the profession is, it's a cool job there. The supply and demand has just always been higher. The supply has always been higher than the demand. And well, you mentioned with the H2F, I think that's a good idea. And I think people are, you know, even private facilities now, people are starting to be able to make a little bit more money and things like that. So we just we need it to flip. We need the demand to be higher than the supply for a handful of years, and then everybody's salary will go up, and then it can flip back over again. So
Well, one other thing I'd add to Adam is, to the just trying to get away with paying people as low as you can, to the internship stuff and the entry level positions. I mean, I've seen situations where it's really an paid internship, and we give it the title that makes it look full time. And what they'll tell you is, well, this is to help you. Like, this is on your resume and you can apply with this title versus the internship thing. Just like, I mean, let's say it's not even a paid internship, it's just a really low paying
yeah,
job. Well, you now get this title, and it's like, well, there's reasons why in a whole bunch of other professions, there's some standardized, whether it's a numbered situation, a rank situation, to where you can't do that because it's dishonest, and you're basically rationalizing how you want it to sound, as far as, we're doing you a favor with the title,
yeah,
versus, oh,
no,
well, we cannot give you this title because we're paying you too little. If we're going to call you this, now we got to pay you in this
yeah.
range. And literally there's rules where that's what we would have to do.
Yeah, that, to be honest with you, that's similar situation to my like part-time position. And that's something I try to always be as upfront as possible. Look, like we can call this whatever we want, but it's basically a paid internship, right? And we can call it, you can boost your resume by calling it whatever you want to call it. And the other thing that I try to do is, which no one ever told me this, I just feel like trying to be a good person is like, hey, I'm never going to ask you to work more hours to where you're like what I can actually pay you, to where you're making like less than like $10 to $12 an hour.
Mhm.
Like the minute it becomes like an unlivable amount of money, I'm not like, it's just, I can't do that to somebody. So, I've been fortunate that I've had, and you've directed some to me, young, hungry, passionate coaches that want the opportunity to take the next step in their career. And again, it's one of those where like, you could say that I'm equally as to blame on that, but it's also like, I only have so much money. If I'm going to advocate for, salaries and stuff, it's going to start with everybody. No, it's going to start with mine, not with the lowest. You know what I mean? So it's like a weird situation where, I personally think, again, I think it's something we need to wrap up here, but like something interesting to talk about as an NSCA state and then regionally and then nationally, because I do think it's going to have to start with, let's just start enforcing the policy so that we do make sure that, all 10 schools in the conference that we're in, they all actually do have a legit full-time position. And
Mhm.
now there's actually like bargaining chips, for each of those positions, right? If somebody wants to go work at a private school, they can bargain to get a higher salary, or somebody can go work at a public school, they can bargain to have better benefits, like whatever it may be. Now you actually have some bargaining chips because there's other competition out there just within our state, our region, nationally. So no, uh, 2 hours. I'm not sure how 2 hours went by that fast. Again, so I'll probably end up thinking about it just right now. I probably will split this into 2 episodes. But it's
Okay.
been a lot of fun. A lot of fun. Getting to catch up with you, guy. You're always very, very like benefit. I always feel very fortunate to get to know you and get to kind of pick your brain on stuff. And it's just always good for me to bounce ideas and ask questions and kind of hear from you, somebody that's been kind of, I guess, doing it longer than me, but also being able to see it from different perspectives as well. I've only ever been in the weight room, right? And
Mhm.
you're seeing it from different perspectives. So, um, and you've probably published more research papers than I'll ever read. Anyway, I appreciate your time. And like I said, I'll keep you in the loop in terms of when I get these kind of up on YouTube and ready to share. But I really appreciate it. And hopefully you have a good rest of your summer.
I appreciate the kind words, and I really appreciate the conversation we've been able to have over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah. All right, guy. Thank you. Have a good rest of your summer.
You too. See you, man.
See ya.